Okay, I can't ignore this anymore. Bro, the Boston Celtics are good. Like, really, 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 really good. So far this season, the Boston Celtics have a record of 45-12 with the number one ranked offense and a top 3 defense. This level of winning is not only projected to be 65 wins by the end of the season, as they're the first team to reach the 45 win mark this early on, but more importantly, and I think something that I think a lot of people are starting to recognize as well, bro, the gap between the Boston Celtics, the number 1 seed in the East, and the 2nd seed in the East, which is the Cleveland Cavaliers, is a wider margin than the number 1 seed out West and the 8th seed in the Phoenix Suns. That's ridiculous. There's a larger gap between the 1 and 2nd seed than the 1st and 8th seed. That's crazy. But yeah, here we are, and the Boston Celtics are dominating in that fashion. A team that potentially will have 2 All-NBA performers, undeniably Jason Tatum will be, but this year, because of the new rules, is not 100% sure if Jaylen Brown is going to reach that mark. Nevertheless, even if he doesn't, the Celtics are still easily the most talented roster in the NBA, especially the starting 5. This is a team that has 4 players averaging 15 points or more, 3 of which averaging 20 points or more, and the player who's leading the charge is Jason Tatum, averaging 27 a game. The shooting splits across the board for this team is really, really ridiculous. It's the reason why they have the number 1 ranked offense in the NBA, in particular with Kristaps Porzingis and even Derrick White, Jrue Holiday. Those additions, as well as the improvements of these players, has really put this team in a different level, in a different tier of not only this season, but all-time great. I think looking back at it now, we can safely say the decision to move on from Marcus Smart and Rob Williams, though it was a tough one, it was the one that was necessary and needed. Jrue Holiday has come in, been a bit more consistent offensively while still providing a lot of defensive value. Though it is slipping, it's still not slipping enough to where we have to have any type of concerns about that position defensively. Porzingis, in my opinion, he has been really, really good. Putting everything into context, you could very well argue that Porzingis is actually having the best season of his career. Porzingis is averaging 20 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks. The shooting splits is where things kind of really separate himself from his prior seasons. 53% from the field, almost 37% from behind the arc, 85% from the free throw line. Even with the reduced role, he's still getting to the charity stripe 5 to 6 times a game, which is on par with what he's normally doing. Shout out to Porzingis, because I think probably the biggest question that a lot of people had this year was if you're going to stay healthy. You've already missed some games, but for the most part, relatively speaking, you've actually been really, really healthy. Having Porzingis on this roster, make adjustments, and really add a layer to this team offensively is something that they desperately needed. It has taken off a lot of responsibilities and pressure off of both Tatum and Brown. Having a player who can just dump the ball in the post, really open up the game a little bit more, and even pick and pop at the top of the key. Again, continue to open up the game even further for a team that already has a lot of three-point shooting. That addition went under the radar, and I want to say it went under the radar, but I don't think really people accepted the potential of what that was going to look like. Me being one of them, because I definitely didn't believe that this is going to pan out the way it has. But I have to admit I was wrong. This right here, that addition of Kristaps Porzingis has really changed and developed what this team does offensively while still keeping their defensive integrity. And the other player I have to give a lot of credit to is Derrick White. On any given night, Derrick White can go on the floor and look like the second best player on this team. The numbers may not stick out to you: 16 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds. Shooting splits are actually really, really respectable. 47% from the field, 40% from behind the arc, and 90% from the free throw line. But the one thing that continues to separate Derrick White from a lot of other supporting cast members across the league is that not only is he providing that type of offensive weaponry, floor spacing, ball handling, but also he's like an elite level defender, probably going to end up being on all league defense. He's the first player so far this season to hit the 50 steal, 50 block, 100 3-pointer mark, the definition of 3-and-D, and his improvement has been very key to what this team is going to need. It's the reason why I believe they actually moved off of Marcus Smart and made that much more palatable, because you're getting a lot of the value that you got from Marcus Smart and Derrick White, but a better offensive version. And I think him being able to handle the offense a lot of times and being that X factor for them, not only in last year's postseason run, but even moving forward, I do believe that's going to be a difference maker for this team in a much bigger scale. Another thing that's very, very interesting about this roster as well is that even though, yes, and I think this is probably a big question that a lot of people had, is their lack of depth. You know, coming off the bench, it ain't too much talent on this roster anymore, which is something that concerned a lot of people, because the Celtics, for most of the Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown era, they've been one of the more deeper teams in the NBA. Depth has been on their side. This year, it really wasn't. Outside of Al Horford, there was a lot of questions and concerns on who was going to come off the bench. To be fair to some of these bench players, I think they've been doing a fantastic job themselves. Shout out to Peyton Pritchard, shout out to Hauser. They're coming in, knocking under threes. That's effectively all they're being asked to do. But I think what's starting to register with a lot of people is that though the team isn't as deep as what they once were, the starting five is so talented that they can start staggering minutes amongst the starting five, plug and play a couple of players, and you don't really lose that much productivity, and you don't really lose that much even when a Tatum comes off the floor, or Jaylen Brown or Porzingis comes off the floor, because you're still playing Jrue Holiday, Derrick White, or the other front court player alongside everyone else. So you're not really losing that much value when you do take some of these players off the team, because that's how talented the starting five is. Huge shout out to Joe Mazzulla for making sure that wasn't a problem for them. And I think moving forward, we're going to continue to see, especially in the postseason, when you start to really restrict the lineups, the rotations, go to really a 7-8 man rotation, you'll start to really see the value of how talented a starting five like this can truly be, and why the depth probably didn't matter as much as a lot of people may have thought it was going to. But the one thing that really stood out to me about the Boston Celtics this year is that they had a net rating of +10, and even beyond net rating, they have a margin of victory of also 10 points or greater, which is crazy. I don't think people understand when you reach into territory of having a net rating or a margin of victory that is in the double digits, you are now in historic territory. To put that into context, there's only been 13 teams in NBA history, only 13 teams in NBA history who have a margin of victory that is 10 or greater. Obviously this year, Boston Celtics team, the Milwaukee Bucks back in 2020, Golden State Warriors in 17, 16, and 15, the San Antonio Spurs in 2016 as well. Then you got to jump all the way to 2008 with the Boston Celtics, historically great defense out in 2008 with the Celtics. Then you got to jump all the way to the Chicago Bulls in the 90s, in 97, 96, and 92. Then you got to jump another 20 years back into the 70s with the Los Angeles Lakers in 72, the Milwaukee Bucks in 72, and the Bucks again in 1971. That is it. That is the company that this Boston Celtics team is in. They are in very rare air. And when you look at the list of teams that I just named out, majority of them won a championship. And if they didn't win a championship, more than likely they either lost to the inevitable champs, such as the Bucks in 1972. They're also in the same league as the Los Angeles Lakers in 72. Or potentially some injuries may have happened. The Golden State Warriors in 2016, they weren't 100% healthy, so that's also a problem. And even the Spurs in 2016 as well. Normally something strange has to happen for you not to win a championship when you're this much better than everyone else. Every sign is pointing to the fact that the Celtics should be the best team in the NBA by a fairly wide margin. History tells us that they should be very favored to win a championship. And yet, for whatever reason, it seems like there is a hesitation to it. Now, I do believe some of that has to do with the fact that Jason Tatum isn't the player that I think a lot of people want him to be or expect him to be. And I think this is also the conversation that's going on around JT over the past week now. I talked about this on my other channel on Foot on the Line about Tatum being the best player in the NBA and being in the MVP race. And I do believe there's some validity behind this. If you look at every other top 10 player in the league, if you put them on a team of this caliber, I would very well argue to say that 7 of those top 10 players, I think all of us would feel very, very confident that they would win a championship. I think pretty confidently, especially when you want to consider that when you look at JT, you look at the Celtics, you look at the coaching, the Celtics are going to go into almost every single series in the Eastern Conference in particular. And I think that's the biggest reason why I want to make this video. Looking at the Eastern Conference, it should be almost a wash that they should get through the East. I mean, we're talking about a team where every team they go up against, they're going to have the best player, the best team, and the best coach. Outside of the Bucks, where Giannis will be the better player, and the Miami Heat, where Coach Spo will be the better coach. That's it. Miami having Coach Spo be the better coach, and Milwaukee having Giannis being the better player. That's the only time where that won't happen. But every other team they go up against, the Celtics are going to have the best player, coach, and team. Easily. They should be strolling into the finals. And then when you look at the other side of the bracket, I don't even really think there's a team outside of the Nuggets that presents such a significant mismatch or disadvantage for the Celtics for anybody to feel confident about them. And I think that's where, again, we get back to this whole Jason Tatum needing to be the player he needs to be. Now, I'm all open for the idea of allowing Tatum and Brown for that matter, because I do believe JB needs to be held accountable or at least put to a bar that I think a lot of people are expecting him to be as well. This is the most talented roster in the Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown era. It has yielded results of historic level and magnitude. And when we're looking at an Eastern Conference where the Bucks are still trying to figure it out, Philly is basically going to be out of contention unless Joel Embiid miraculously comes back and he's 100% healthy, which I don't think is going to happen. And everybody else is kind of just wavering. Of course, Miami, you got to just put respect in their name at this point because they keep figuring it out almost every single year. So that's fair. But like, this is the year. This is the year. I think we all feel that this is the year that they're supposed to win. And if they don't do it, then we need to start having very serious conversations. Because, again, every marker is pointing to the Celtics not only being the best team in the NBA, but one of the best teams the league has ever seen. And yet it doesn't even feel that way. In particular, from a historic level, it doesn't feel like this is one of the greatest teams in NBA history, even though several different metrics point out to that undeniably, right? It just points out to that. So when you look at this team from an offensive standpoint, there's not really a part on the floor where they don't make their shots an above average rate. In particular, at the rim, they're converting their shots at roughly 70%. One of the best three-point shooting teams in the NBA as well. So the two most efficient areas to score, they do it at a very, very, very high rate. They have a superstar caliber player, or a player who is supposed to step up to the level of being a superstar. Jason Tatum, top 10 player in the NBA. Let Stephen A. Smith tell it. MVP player, MVP runner right now. Or let Stephen A. Smith tell you he's supposed to be the player who's leading the MVP race. Has a really, really talented team. Address a lot of the playmaking and shot creation concerns and brought in another player to relieve both JB and Tatum of those type of concerns in the postseason that they've had throughout the past 2 to 3 years in Porzingis, while also just providing them two-way players at practically every position. Great coach. Conference should be fairly easy to go through. If it's not the Nuggets, I don't really know who it's going to be. And I think that we should, and it's not even really a knock on Tatum or Jaylen Brown. I just think that we should really start looking at the Boston Celtics as a historically great team, because that is the results, that's the numbers, that is what they're presenting to us right now. And I don't want us to get too deep into the season or even in the playoffs and everybody's like, oh wow, oh man, they are really that good. And, and I don't want it to like scare you. I want you to really appreciate what they're doing right now. And the only thing that really is stopping them, or really stopping, I think, a lot of people having a conversation about them and talking about them in the same light of an all-time great team, is the fact that it feels like Jason Tatum may not be an all-time great player. But I do believe this postseason run, he can present the evidence of being that. I do believe Tatum has the ability to show the world that, hey, I can be that player. And I think he's talking that way as well. He just recently did an interview talking about him being the best player in the NBA. And I do love that type of confidence from him. And also, Jaylen Brown got to win a championship this year because he's running out of years to start winning championships, as he had said not too long ago. And this team seems like it has the makeup to do it. And I believe that we should start having the conversation in every single regards. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you feel about the Boston Celtics? Do you believe they are a legit title contending team? And if so, how deep in the playoffs will they go? Do you have them winning a championship? And where do you view Jason Tatum amongst all of this conversation about how great he is amongst all the other players in the NBA, in particular on a team this talented? But until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.